The specialists first believed it was only a simple wedding photograph, until they noticed what was behind the bride. That single picture caught Dr. Emily Chen's eye immediately. Among hundreds of objects at the San Francisco estate auction, this one clearly stood apart. It was a formal wedding portrait from 1884, set inside an ornate silver frame, decorated with delicate filigree around the edges. Emily, a curator who focused on 19th-century photography at the California Historical Society, had attended the auction, hoping to discover pieces for the museum's upcoming exhibition on Victorian mourning customs. She expected to see the usual family portraits, landscapes, maybe even a few daguerreotypes. But this wedding image was unlike the rest. The photograph showed a bride and groom posed inside a photographer's studio. The bride was seated in an elegant chair, wearing a lovely white silk gown with fine lace trim. Her veil fell softly over her shoulders, and she held a bouquet that appeared to be lilies. The groom stood beside her, one hand resting on the back of the chair, dressed in a formal black suit. At first glance, it looked like a normal Victorian wedding portrait, stiff and formal, the subjects frozen because of the long exposure times cameras required in those days. Yet something felt wrong. Emily studied the photograph more closely through the display case. The bride's posture seemed too rigid, even by Victorian photography standards. Her eyes had something unusual about them. They appeared unfocused, staring past the camera instead of looking into it. The groom's face did not show happiness or pride. Instead, there was sadness, barely hidden behind a controlled expression. Lot 247, the auctioneer announced. Victorian wedding photograph from around 1884. Photographer unknown. Silver frame with provenance from the Whitmore estate. Bidding begins at $200. Emily lifted her paddle without hesitation. 3 other bidders competed with her, but she continued, finally winning at $850, more than she normally spent. Still, her instincts told her this photograph mattered. An hour later, Emily sat in her car in the auction house parking lot, the photograph carefully wrapped in acid-free tissue paper on the passenger seat. She could not explain why she had felt so strongly about buying it. During her 15 years in the field, she had examined thousands of Victorian photographs. Wedding portraits were common, but this one felt different. This one seemed to be hiding something. As Emily drove back to the museum through the fog-covered streets of San Francisco, she had no idea that this photograph would reveal a story so painful it would challenge everything she believed about Victorian mourning customs, family responsibility, and the lengths people would go to maintain the appearance of respectability. The truth had been captured inside that image, waiting 140 years to be discovered. Emily arrived at the museum early the next morning. Unable to wait for regular hours to properly inspect the photograph, she carried it directly to the conservation laboratory, where she had access to high-resolution scanning equipment and special lighting designed to reveal details invisible to the naked eye. She carefully removed the photograph from its frame. The backing was original thick cardboard stamped with the photographer's mark. Morrison and Associates, Memorial Photography, San Francisco, California. Emily's pulse quickened. That phrase was commonly connected with post-mortem photography during the Victorian era. She placed the image under the lab's digital scanner, a machine capable of capturing tiny details at high magnification. While the scan processed, Emily wrote notes about what she observed: the studio background, the furniture, the couple's clothing, the flowers. 20 minutes later, the digital file appeared on her computer screen in remarkable clarity. Emily began enlarging different sections, and with every detail she examined, her suspicions grew stronger. First, the bride's hands. They were arranged neatly in her lap, holding the lily bouquet, but her fingers looked stiff, almost wax-like. Her skin tone appeared slightly different from her face, paler with faint discoloration that Victorian photographers often tried to conceal using powder and careful lighting. Emily shifted her focus to the bride's face. Her eyes, now magnified, showed no catchlight, that tiny reflection usually visible in living eyes. Her pupils were fixed and wide. Her lips, carefully colored with what seemed to be rouge, showed a faint blue shade beneath the makeup. Then Emily noticed the chair. Behind the bride, partly hidden by the elaborate studio curtain, was a metal structure, a posing stand. These devices were commonly used in Victorian photography to help subjects remain still during long exposures. But this one appeared different. It was not nearly supporting the bride's back. It looked as though it was holding her entire body upright. Emily's hands trembled as she zoomed in on the area behind the bride's head. There, barely visible in the shadows, she saw what looked like a thin wire or brace running up the back of the chair, positioned to keep the head steady. She turned her attention to the groom. His expression, now clear on the screen, was unmistakable. Deep grief mixed with something else, guilt perhaps, or resignation. His hand resting on the chair was not relaxed. His knuckles were pale, gripping the wood tightly, as if it were the only thing keeping him standing. Emily leaned back in her chair, breathing slowly. This was not a true wedding portrait. It was a post-mortem photograph, arranged to look like a wedding that never actually occurred. But why would a family go to such extreme effort to create such an illusion? Over the next several days, Emily researched Morrison and Associates. The name appeared in San Francisco business directories from 1878 to 1891, listed under memorial photography services. This studio specialized in post-mortem photography, a common and socially accepted practice during the Victorian period, when photographing the deceased was often the only way families could preserve their likeness. However, Morrison and Associates had an unusual detail. According to newspaper advertisements Emily found in the San Francisco Chronicle archives, they offered commemorative portraiture for all occasions, preserving dignity and memory with artistic sensitivity and discretion. The phrase, "all occasions," stood out. Most post-mortem photographers clearly advertised funeral portraits, children's memorial images, or family remembrance photographs. Morrison's carefully vague wording suggested they accepted unusual or delicate requests. Emily contacted the San Francisco Genealogical Society, hoping to uncover more information about the Whitmore family, whose estate had included the photograph. A researcher named David returned her call within 2 days. The Whitmores were prominent in San Francisco society from the 1870s into the early 1900s, David explained. They earned their fortune through shipping and real estate. I located several mentions in society columns and charity events. Is there any record of a wedding in 188? 4, Emily asked. Yes, actually. Let me check my notes. She heard papers moving in the background. Here it is. A wedding announcement appeared in the Chronicle in June 1884. Victoria Whitmore, daughter of Richard and Eleanor Whitmore, was to marry James Ashford, son of the Ashford banking family. It was expected to be the major social event of the season, 2 of San Francisco's wealthiest families joining together. Expected to be, Emily repeated. That's the interesting part, David continued. The announcement was printed, but I cannot find any report of the actual ceremony. No society column description, no guest list, nothing. For a family that important, that is unusual. Such events were normally covered in great detail. Emily's heart beat faster. What happened to Victoria Whitmore? There is a death certificate dated June 15th, 1884, the same day as the planned wedding. Cause of death is listed as typhoid fever. She was 22 years old. Emily closed her eyes as the pieces began to fit together. And James Ashford never married, David added. He lived until 1923, died at 61. He spent much of his life involved in charity work, especially supporting hospitals and disease prevention programs. There is even a hospital wing in San Francisco named after him. After ending the call, Emily removed the photograph once more and studied it with new understanding. Victoria Whitmore had died on her wedding day. Somehow, her family had arranged this portrait to create the appearance of a marriage that never took place. But what had driven them to do it? And what role had James Ashford played in maintaining this illusion? Emily later stood outside the former Whitmore mansion on Nob Hill, now converted into luxury apartments. The Victorian building had survived the 1906 earthquake and fire, though it had been heavily renovated over time. Still, the exterior retained much of its original beauty. Tall bay windows, detailed molding, and a curved staircase leading to a grand entrance. She had arranged a meeting with the current property manager, Robert Chen, who agreed to show her the historical records stored in the basement archive. The Residents Association keeps everything, Robert explained as he guided her down a narrow staircase. It is part of the building's historic designation requirements. We have documents dating back to the original construction in 1875. The basement archive was climate-controlled and well-organized. Metal filing cabinets lined the wall, each labeled by decade. Robert opened the drawer marked 1880 to 1889. "What exactly are you searching for?" he asked. "Anything connected to June 1884, Emily replied, "especially regarding Victoria Whitmore." Robert's expression softened. "Ah, the tragedy. You are aware of it. I have read many of these records over the years. It is part of my work, and honestly, the history is fascinating. The Victoria Whitmore story is truly heartbreaking." Inside were newspaper clippings, private letters, and household expense records from that period. The first document was a letter dated May 1884, written by Eleanor Whitmore to her sister in Boston. Emily began to read carefully. "Dearest Margaret, preparations for Victoria's wedding continue, though I confess my heart feels heavy." According to her notes, she had been sick for the last 2 weeks, suffering from fever, deep weakness, and no desire to eat. The doctor kept assuring the family that it was only wedding nerves, something many young brides go through before their big day. James came every single day, bringing fresh flowers and sitting beside her bed while reading aloud. He was completely devoted to Margaret. She could not have hoped for a kinder or more faithful match. The wedding, everyone said, must continue as planned. Too much had already been organized. Too many promises had been made. Richard firmly believed that Victoria would regain her strength in time. I pray that he is correct. Emily felt a cold shiver run down her back. The mother had felt in her heart that something was not right, yet the weight of society and family responsibility had silenced her natural instincts. The following letter was dated June 10th, 1884. "Margaret Victoria grows worse with each passing day. The doctor now believes it is typhoid fever. He recommends postponing the wedding and transferring her to a sanitarium where she can receive proper treatment. But Richard will not agree. He says the disgrace of postponement would be unbearable, that both families would suffer humiliation, and business agreements could fall apart. He insists Victoria is strong enough to endure the ceremony and can rest afterward to recover." Emily's hands shook as she continued reading. Robert watched her expression carefully, understanding what the words were doing to her. "There is more," he said softly, taking out another folder. These were discovered during renovations in 1998, hidden inside a wall space in what used to be Victoria's bedroom. The workers nearly threw them out, but the foreman sensed they might have historical value. Inside were letters written by James Ashford to Victoria during her illness. Emily read them, her emotions rising with each line. The first was dated May 20th, 1884. "My dearest Victoria, I brought you white roses today, your favorites. You smiled when you saw them, though I could see how much strength it took. Your mother says you slept poorly again last night. I wish I could take this sickness from you and carry it myself so you could be healthy. The wedding preparations continue, but please understand they mean nothing if you are not truly well. I would wait forever if I had to. Your health matters more than any ceremony. Tell me honestly how you feel. I may be your future husband, but above all, I am your friend. You can trust me with the truth. All my love, James." The letters continued, growing more urgent as Victoria declined. James wrote almost every day. Each message revealed a man torn between his deep love for his fiancée and his growing fear of what her family demanded. June 12, 1884. "Victoria, I spoke to your father today. I begged him to delay the wedding so you could heal properly. He refused. He grew angry and accused me of wanting to escape our engagement. That is not true. I wish to marry you more than anything, but not like this, not when you can hardly lift your head from the pillow. I suggested a small private ceremony at your bedside if a public wedding is too much. He rejected the idea, saying it was beneath the family's honor. I feel powerless. Please tell me what you desire. I will respect your wishes, whatever they are." Then came the letter dated June 14th, 1884, the day before the planned wedding, and the day before Victoria's death. "My love, I visited you today and found you unconscious. Your mother sat beside you crying. The doctor pulled me aside and said you are dying, that you may have only hours left, perhaps a single day. I asked if anything could be done. He said no, The fever has advanced too far, and your organs are failing. I asked your father again to cancel tomorrow's ceremony. He refused. He said everything is arranged, guests are expecting it, and canceling would create a scandal that would destroy both families' reputations. He said we will go forward as planned. If you are gone before tomorrow, he will manage it quietly. I do not understand what he means, and I fear that I do. Victoria, if somehow you can hear me, know that I love you. I would have been honored to be your husband. You deserved far better than this, James. Emily wiped tears from her eyes while Robert silently handed her a box of tissues. The last letter was dated June 16, 1884, the day after Victoria passed away. I do not know why I am writing. You are gone. Yesterday morning your mother came to my hotel and told me you died during the night. She said the wedding would still happen, though not as originally planned. I did not understand until I arrived at the studio of Thomas Morrison. Everything had been arranged. They had dressed you in your wedding gown and seated you in a chair. They asked me to stand beside you. They wanted to create a photograph of our wedding day. I refused at first. I said it was horrible, disrespectful, wrong. Your father threatened to ruin my family's bank if I would not cooperate. He said both families needed the image as proof the marriage had occurred to protect their standing in society. So I stood there. I stood beside the woman I loved, who had died the night before, and allowed them to photograph us as though we were newly married. I have never felt such shame. I am weak. I am a coward. You deserved someone who would have defied your father, who would have protected you even after death. Instead, you had me. I will never forgive myself. I will never marry. The only woman I ever loved is gone, and I betrayed her memory for the sake of appearances. This will follow me until I die. I am deeply sorry. Emily realized she needed to learn more about Morrison and how such a detailed post-mortem portrait had been carried out. She reached out to the Special Collections Department at the San Francisco Public Library, which preserved records of local businesses from the 19th century. A librarian named Susan assisted her in searching through boxes from long-closed photography studios. After 2 full days, they discovered a journal kept by Morrison himself, recording his most important assignments between 1880 and 1890. The entry for June 15, 1884, was especially detailed. He wrote that he received an urgent request from Richard Whitmore that morning under very unusual circumstances. His daughter Victoria had died overnight from typhoid fever. She was meant to marry James Ashford that very day. Whitmore demanded a wedding portrait despite her death and offered 3 times the usual payment for complete secrecy and technical perfection. Morrison explained that he had practiced memorial photography for 20 years, photographing many deceased individuals, mostly children, to help grieving families keep a final memory. But this case was different. It was not about grief. It was about duty to society and protecting appearances. He described the challenges. Post-mortem photography normally showed the deceased resting peacefully, lying down or seated naturally. Creating an image where the subject appeared alive and part of an event was much harder. The eyes were especially difficult because they lost their brightness within hours of death. Careful lighting and later retouching of the negative would be required. Whitmore agreed to every condition. Victoria's mother and maid dressed her in the wedding gown at home. The body was brought to the studio before sunrise to avoid notice. Morrison and his assistant worked quickly, placing her in their finest chair using a reinforced posing stand to hold her upright. The head support was hidden under her veil. Her hands were arranged to hold a bouquet, though rigor mortis made this complicated, and they had to gently position her fingers. Powder covered the pale signs of death, and rouge added color to her lips and cheeks. Pearl earrings and a necklace were used to distract from the lifeless skin. James Ashford arrived at 9 in the morning, looking shattered. He first refused, but Whitmore's threats forced him to stay. Morrison wrote that he felt pity for the young man, who clearly loved Victoria and was trapped in a cruel performance. The session lasted 2 hours. Perfect lighting was essential to hide the truth while keeping the image clear. 6 exposures were taken, knowing some would fail. Ashford stood stiff beside her, never meeting her eyes. His hand trembled twice, and he stepped away briefly to steady himself. Whitmore, however, showed no grief, only impatience. Morrison admitted this was the most troubling assignment of his career. Though paid well, he felt he had crossed an ethical boundary. Victoria deserved peace, not to be posed like a doll to protect her father's pride. He promised to deliver the print and attempt to forget the event, though some memories are too heavy to erase. Emily closed the journal feeling ill. The photograph was not simply a memorial portrait. It was evidence that even in death, Victoria had no control over her own body or story. Emily decided her next step was to investigate how society in San Francisco responded to Victoria's death and the supposed wedding. She spent a week examining newspaper archives from June and July 1884 at the California Historical Society. What she uncovered was a carefully organized cover story. The original wedding announcement in May had described a grand ceremony with over 300 guests, to be held at Grace Cathedral, followed by a reception at the Palace Hotel, and the honeymoon in Europe. One columnist had called it the grandest union of the season, bringing together two of the most respected families in the city. But the reports printed after June 15th told a very different version of events, carefully shaped and quietly controlled, as if the truth itself had been gently buried. A small notice appeared on June 17th. The wedding of Miss Victoria Whitmore and Mr. James Ashford took place in a quiet private ceremony on June 15th. Because of the sudden sickness of the bride's mother, the couple asked for privacy while Mrs. Whitmore recovered. They also delayed their honeymoon with no new date given. Another newspaper printed a similar notice with slight wording differences. Miss Victoria Whitmore and Mr. James Ashford were married in a small family ceremony that Sunday. The larger public celebration that had been planned was postponed out of respect for a sick relative. Neither notice said anything about Victoria's death. Her obituary was printed 3 days later, on June 19th, placed in the back pages. Mrs. Victoria Ashford, née Whitmore, age 22, died on June 18th, after a short illness. She was survived by her husband James Ashford and her parents Richard and Eleanor Whitmore. Private funeral services were held. No flowers by request. Emily read the obituary 3 times, and her anger grew each time. They had listed Victoria as Mrs. Victoria Ashford, a married woman, even though she had died before she ever married. They had also changed the date of her death, moving it 3 days later to make it seem as if she had lived long enough to become a wife. As she continued her research, she found more proof in the newspaper correspondence columns. Several readers had written letters asking about the wedding, saying they had received invitations but then got last-minute cancellations. The newspaper replies were vague and unclear. Family matters required a change in plans. The ceremony was held privately. The families appreciated understanding during this difficult period. Emily later discovered that both the Whitmore and Ashford families had given large donations to the newspapers within weeks of Victoria's death. The amounts were significant, enough to ensure silence and cooperation in protecting the false story. Still, not everyone believed it. In a smaller paper called The Call, Emily found a letter to the editor, published anonymously on July 2, 1884. It read that the writer had worked as a maid in the Whitmore home and wanted to tell the truth about Miss Victoria Whitmore. She had not married Mr. Ashford. She died on June 15th, the day her wedding was planned, from typhoid fever. The family invented the wedding story to protect their place in society. The letter said Victoria was kind and gentle and deserved better than to have her death turned into a public performance. The writer stayed anonymous out of fear, but insisted that the truth mattered. Victoria died unmarried, in pain, and her family cared more about reputation than her dignity. Although the letter was printed, Emily found no sign that it caused public concern or investigation. One anonymous voice was not strong enough to challenge 2 wealthy and respected families. Through genealogy records, Emily traced living descendants of both families. The Ashford family line had continued through James's younger brother. She contacted his great-great-grandson Michael Ashford, who lived in Portland. When she explained her findings, Michael was open and honest from the start. He told her that his family had known the real story for generations. James had told his brother everything, including the forced photograph and the guilt he carried. The story had been passed down as a warning about valuing reputation over basic humanity. Michael agreed to meet Emily in San Francisco the next week. He brought a box of old family papers, including letters James had written and that his brother had saved. One letter dated 1900 showed that James had never recovered from what happened. He wrote that he had never married and gave himself fully to charity work as a form of punishment. Every hospital he helped build and every health program he funded was his attempt to make up for his weakness. In 1884, he wrote that he should have refused and protected Victoria's dignity, even if it ruined both families socially. Instead, he stood by while they posed her body like a doll. He allowed them to create a lie that lasted for 16 years. People still offered him sympathy for losing his wife. He never corrected them. He wrote that the truth was too shameful. She was never his wife. She died before the ceremony. He had taken part in using her body to make a false wedding photograph. He said some actions can never truly be forgiven. Michael also brought the photograph. His family had kept a copy, the same image Emily had first seen at an auction. James had kept it in a desk drawer until his death. He did not display it, but he could not throw it away. Michael said his great-grandfather remembered that James would sometimes take it out and stare at it for long periods, often crying. James died of a heart attack in 1923 while sitting at his desk with the photograph in front of him. Emily then reached out to the Whitmore descendants. She located Eleanor Whitmore's great-great-granddaughter Sarah Morrison, who lived in Sacramento. Sarah happened to share the photographer's last name through marriage. Her reaction was very different from Michael's. She sounded cold and defensive. She asked why Emily was bringing up something that happened 140 years ago. Everyone involved was long dead. What good would come from reopening old family pain? Emily explained that it was about historical truth and about honoring Victoria's real life. Sarah refused to meet or share any family records. She said her great-great-grandmother Eleanor had suffered deeply after Victoria's death and had spent the rest of her life donating to hospitals and medical research. She had done many good deeds. Why focus on one terrible choice made during extreme grief? Emily answered softly that Victoria deserved to have her true story told. She deserved to be remembered honestly, not as part of a social lie. Sarah ended the call without replying. Emily wrote a detailed article for the Journal of American Historical Photography. She explained the photograph, the technical proof that it was taken after death, Morrison's journal notes, James Ashford's letters, the newspaper cover-up, and the social pressures of the Victorian period. The article was titled Death and Deception: How a San Francisco Family Staged a Wedding That Never Was. The reaction was immediate and strong. Major news outlets picked up the story. San Francisco Chronicle, one of the same papers that had once supported the false report, published a front-page article about the discovery. Emily appeared on several morning news shows. She carefully explained that post-mortem photography was common in Victorian America. Families often photographed loved ones after death, especially children, because it might be the only picture they would ever have. But she made it clear that this case was different. This was not about memory or love. It was about protecting social image and denying a young woman's truth even after she died. When the photograph was shown on television with Emily's explanation of the posing stand, the still eyes, and James's expression of sorrow, viewers felt both disturbed and deeply moved. Historians and ethicists discussed the case publicly. Some believed that exposing such private pain was unfair to modern descendants. Others argued that historical truth is important, especially when it shows the harsh limits placed on women in that era. A historian of Victorian culture, Dr. Patricia Holmes, wrote an opinion piece supporting Emily's work. She explained that the Victoria Whitmore case showed how far families would go to keep social status, even to the point of hiding death. Victoria had little control over her life, pushed toward an arranged marriage while seriously ill, and then denied dignity in death. Her story represented many other women whose lives were ruled by family duty and public expectation. The California Historical Society soon received many calls from people who had heard similar family stories. Some described relatives whose deaths were hidden or changed to avoid shame. One woman from Los Angeles told Emily about her great-great-aunt, who was said to have died in childbirth in 1890. But family whispers suggested she had died from a failed abortion. After an assault, the family had created a detailed false story to escape scandal. Another caller spoke about finding an old family portrait in her grandmother's attic, where one child's face looked strange and lifeless. Research later showed the child had died days earlier and had been posed with living siblings for the picture. Emily realized that Victoria's story had opened the door for other hidden histories to be shared. 6 months after her article was released, the California Historical Society opened a permanent exhibit titled Hidden Truths: Victorian Women and the Price of Propriety. At the center of the exhibit was Victoria Whitmore's photograph, now displayed with full explanation and honesty. The text beside it stated that Victoria Whitmore, born 1862, died 1884, and that the image was not a wedding portrait, but a post-mortem photograph, staged to create the appearance of a marriage that never happened. Victoria died of typhoid fever on June 15, 1884, the morning of her planned wedding to James Ashford. Her father, choosing reputation over his daughter's dignity, hired photographer Thomas Morrison to create the false image. Victoria was dressed and arranged to look like a bride, but the truth, at last, stood beside her image for everyone to see. In her wedding dress, placed carefully with a posing stand, and photographed beside her living fiancé to meet social expectations and prevent public shame. This image shows the total loss of freedom many Victorian women faced, ruled by family, society, and strict traditions, and even directed in death. Beneath the main photograph, the exhibition showed several of James Ashford's letters, Morrison's diary entry, and newspaper articles that revealed both the false story and the final truth. Another panel paid tribute to Victoria herself, using details Emily had collected from family letters and private papers. Victoria Whitmore was described by people who knew her as bright, artistic, and gentle. She loved painting and writing poetry. She had hoped to attend college but was not allowed by her father, who believed higher education was unsuitable for women. She became engaged to James Ashford in 1883, a match arranged by their families for business and social advantage. Letters show that Victoria and James formed real affection for each other, despite the arranged agreement. She became sick in May 1884, but was not permitted to delay the wedding. She died at the age of 22, spending her final week too ill to fight her family's decisions for her. The exhibition also presented a section about James Ashford's later years. James Ashford never remarried after Victoria's passing. He used his large fortune to support hospitals, disease prevention efforts, and programs focused on women's health. In 1890, he created the Victoria Whitmore Memorial Fund, which offered free medical treatment to low-income women in San Francisco. Although he never publicly shared his reasons, family letters show his many years of guilt over taking part in the photograph after her death. He passed away in 1923, said to have kept Victoria's photograph on his desk until the end. Michael Ashford attended the opening of the exhibition and donated several of James's letters to the museum's permanent collection. "My great-great-uncle spent his whole life trying to make things right," Michael said during his speech. He could not save Victoria, and he could not refuse what her family demanded, but he could help other women, and he did. I am thankful that his story and Victoria's real story can finally be told truthfully. Emily stood inside the gallery during the opening night, watching visitors respond to the photograph and the history behind it. Many people were deeply touched. Some wept quietly. Others remained standing in silence, studying the image with a new sense of awareness. One young woman, likely in her early 20s, close to Victoria's age when she died, stood in front of the photograph for almost 20 minutes. At last, she turned to Emily, who was nearby. "Thank you for sharing her story," the woman said softly, "for allowing her to be seen as she truly was, not as her family wanted others to see her." After the event, Emily returned to her office, exhausted but satisfied. On her desk was an email from Sarah Morrison, a descendant of Eleanor Whitmore, who at first refused to help. "Dr. Chen, I owe you an apology. I watched your interview yesterday and read the exhibition information online. You were correct. Victoria deserves to have her real story told. My family owns boxes filled with Eleanor's letters and journals that I would like to donate to the museum." Eleanor never forgave herself for failing to protect Victoria, for not standing up to her husband. She wrote about her regret, often in her later years. Perhaps sharing those writings can help others understand the difficult position many women faced in that time, caught between a mother's love and complete obedience to their husbands. "I am sorry for how I reacted at first. Thank you for honoring Victoria's memory with such dignity and care. Emily smiled gently and began writing a reply. The work of revealing hidden histories was never fully complete. Every photograph, every letter, every quiet story represented a person whose truth had been hidden for the sake of reputation or convenience. But slowly, one by one, those truths could be brought back into the light. One by one, the silenced voices could be heard again. Victoria Whitmore's photograph would no longer be mistaken for a simple wedding picture. It would remain as proof of a young woman who deserved more from life, and of the many others whose stories were still waiting to be uncovered. Their truths, still resting in the shadows of old photographs, waiting for someone to look carefully enough to notice what was really there. The work would continue. The truth always finds a way to rise in the end, and Emily would be there to help reveal it, one photograph at a time.